So I defended in this room in '92.
Oh, it's true.
In those days, we used to use that screen. So I was over there about where Essen is. All we had in here was that screen and a little TV that used to sit on a stand, and that was it. And so basically, that was the infrastructure, and everything else you had to bring. So, yeah, no, everybody defended in this room. It was the only room we had of any size. So, and the table is obviously all faced the other way. Anyway, welcome everybody. So this is, as many of you know, in ACL, this is the second of the fourth in this summer's series of defenses we have. Today is going to be Nick, following Coda from last week. I'm looking forward to Nick's diagnosis of my emails traffic. Such that we got last week with very detailed discussion of how many words per day or something like that. I'm not sure. Anyway, we'll see how that goes. Anyway, Nick's been with the group since 2021, and often with students, they sort of have a connection that they make that is good to see. I mean, in the sense that not everybody understands it. So Nick is the connection to Michael sitting over here, who's in our group and is now just a Northeastern. And so the connection there is on the certification work and verification that Michael was doing as part of the end of his PhD work. And so Nick has been continuing with that. And it's good to have Michael here because now when I mention Michael's name, it isn't just Nick that knows. Now everybody can meet Michael and know who he is. So it's good to have ACL alum come back for these types of things. I'm looking forward to what Nick has to say. And then hopefully in 5 or 6 years, we can have the next student make the connection to Nick when we continue this type of work to move forward. All right, so today, like I say, Nick is going to talk to us about the work he's been doing on verification and certification and report to it. All right, so the plan will be, you talk for about 50 minutes, key questions to absolute minimum, and then we'll have public and private sessions after that. Okay, thanks.
Cool. All right, thank you, John. So yeah, thank you everyone for coming. I'm excited to see you all here. Today, I'm going to be talking about the work I've been doing over the last 3 years on reachability-based safety assurances for neural feedback loops with bounded uncertainty. I'm really excited about this work, and given the title, it might be a tall task, but I'm hoping to get you all excited for this work as well once I'm done. Okay, so motivation, as I'm sure you're all aware, we're living in an increasingly automated world, whether it's ground robots delivering your food, drones delivering your packages, or self-driving cars delivering you. We're living in kind of an unprecedented age in autonomy in the real world. However, safety is still a top concern. We see headlines like this all the time, whether it's ground robots, drones, or cars. These are kind of varying levels of severity, but all related to safety and some sort of safety violation that makes the news, which is not great for us. This is especially concerning when we consider learned components. So machine learning is a set of tools that we can use that really unlock a lot of cool capabilities for autonomous systems. But the issue is that the neural networks that they're built on are very sensitive to input perturbations. So if you consider this cat or this image of my 2 cats, Shadow and Cricket, this is something that I pass into a neural network that classifies images. So the output of that neural network is Egyptian cat. But what you see here is a mask that I kind of carefully crafted. This is something that we superimpose on our original image so that each pixel gets changed just a little bit to give us this output image. And this image looks the same to everybody here. We would clearly say that this is still a picture of my 2 cats, but the neural network now says, that is an accordion. So this is obviously not good. And the question that I'm kind of interested in, what does this mean for the safety of neural feedback loops? So to kind of start beginning to answer that question, what are neural feedback loops? Neural feedback loops are just closed loop systems with neural network components somewhere in their autonomy pipeline. So if we consider an example, lane keeping in cars. So this is something that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. The car just has to stay somewhere in this lane, ideally near the center. What a neural feedback loop for this system might look like is we have our system dynamics. So this is, the car itself. This is the actual, kind of system that we're trying to keep on the road. That system has a state. So this is the position in the lane. And this is the thing that we actually need to keep safe, right? We may have a camera on the car. So this is something that's looking at the road, taking video of the lane line, and that's giving us the measurements for a neural network estimator. So this is a neural network that takes in those images and gives you a state estimate of the position in the lane. So we now have a neural network that is estimating where we are on the road. And that estimate can be passed into a neural network controller, right? So this controller takes that estimate and tells you, or tells the car how to steer, right? So this is all autonomous, but we have these 2 neural networks in this loop. And the issue is, as we saw on the last slide, these neural networks can be sensitive to input perturbations, right? So if we saw the small change in an input causes a big change in outputs, that would be like a small change in the measurements, or the state estimate changes the steering inputs quite a bit, right? Furthermore, if we consider the actual kind of math behind this, these 2 components, the system dynamics and the camera, are usually subject to some sort of disturbances. So we'll see more about that on the next slide. But given that there's disturbances and these are sensitive to input perturbations, and we need to keep this safe, this is kind of the beginning of the challenge. So neural feedback loops can be subject to uncertainty from a variety of different sources. So we could consider initial state uncertainty. So this is kind of some idea of you don't know exactly where the system is initialized. You might have unknown disturbances. So if the road is more or less slick than you originally planned for because of rain or snow. And then we also have state estimation error. So the camera feed into a neural network is never going to be perfect, right? So there's some error in our state estimate. So these are a bunch of uncertainties that are affecting neural feedback loops that we want to be able to protect against. And so we need these strong safety assurances for NFL is subject to uncertainty. That is kind of the punchline here, and that's what my thesis addresses. And I do that using a set of tools called reachability analysis. So reachability analysis is basically taking a set of possible inputs to a system, some system we'll talk about, and quantifying the behavior and giving you a set of outputs. So neural network verification is one example. So if we look at this example that we previously saw, these 2 cats plus some possible perturbation to that image, that's the set of inputs. We're analyzing the actual neural network itself. And then the set of outputs is the set of possible labels that our neural network classifier might output, right? So could be Egyptian cat if the perturbation is 0, maybe. We saw a perturbation that showed accordion. There might be other perturbations that give you something like tabby cat. Closed loop NFL reachability. So this is where we take a possible set of initial states, so where the system could be initialized, and then we analyze the closed loop system, so the dynamics plus the neural network controller, and our output is the possible future states of the system. So it gives us an idea of where the system will go under that neural network control law. Finally, this one's a little bit different, but our input set is an unsafe region. So this is the set of states that we don't want to be in. We're analyzing the system dynamics, so the actual car itself, the math behind the car, and we get a maximal safe set. So this is a set of states that there exists some safe control. So this is where the car needs to stay to be guaranteed safe. So to actually use these tools for safety of neural feedback loops, we'll first look at this idea of closed loop reachability safety verification. So this is where we're using this NFL reachability technique to approximate these true reachable sets. So these kind of amorphous shapes here are the true set of states that the system will reach from that initial state set. And so this is, kind of the ideal thing that we would have, but it's very difficult to calculate, very expensive. So in practice, it's not used very, very widely. What we do instead is calculate these reachable set over approximations. So these are kind of the rectangles that bound those future reachable sets. Much easier to calculate, but they have some problems, as we'll see. Online safety filtering is another mechanism. So this is something where this closed loop verification is done offline. So you do it at design time. This is something you do before you send your system out in the world. This one is done online. So when your system is running, it's doing its thing. Maybe there's a neural network that's controlling the system. What safety filtering does is it checks the control input at every time step to see if it is safe or unsafe. And if it's unsafe, it makes some modification of that control to preserve the safety of the system. So these are the 2 kind of paradigms that I'll use throughout this thesis to address a set of problems. So my thesis addresses 3 problems for NFL safety under uncertainty. The first problem relates to those reachable set over approximations that we saw previously. So these reachable sets, we can calculate them quickly, But if they're overly conservative, they may detect false collisions, right? So you can see that like the true reachable set never actually hits either the person or the tree, but our over approximations show a collision with the tree. And this makes it harder to use these tools because if it's, constantly saying that we're going to collide and it never actually does, that's not very good. There are refinement techniques that can be used to reduce the conservativeness of these reachable set over approximations, but they scale poorly with respect to the time horizon, so how many steps we're doing, and the state space. So for maybe a 3D car, it's okay, but a 6D drone, much more difficult. Problem 2 has to do with the dynamic disturbances. So basically, if you're, maybe on any given day, your boat behaves like this, you can kind of plan for that. But if one day maybe it sucks up some seaweed, right, and now the thruster doesn't work as well, it might behave differently. And so planning for this in a pre-deployment certification phase is difficult, and we'll talk about those challenges later. Finally, for safety filtering, existing safety filters don't really account for the state estimation error that you might see from an adversarial attack. So you could consider if, we're trying to keep this plane on the runway, we're doing the same thing that we did with the lane keeping car. A safety filter only knows about the state estimate. So it may keep the state estimate safe, but if there's a difference between the state estimate and the true state, you may actually have a safety violation that the safety filter can't really defend against. So these are the 3 problems. And in response, I have 4 contributions. So contribution 1 deals with problem 1. I introduce a constraint-aware refinement technique for reachable set over approximations that scales with the time horizon and the state space. I introduce an online disturbance estimation technique that that passes the disturbance into the reachability analysis for runtime verification. And then for problem 3, I have 2 contributions: guaranteed reachability-based safety filtering for NFLs under adversarial attack, and then a scalable and performance safety filtering technique for NFLs with large state estimation error. So to talk about contribution 1, let's dive right in. And we'll talk about a little bit of an introduction on how you actually calculate these closed loop reachable set over approximations, or RSOAs. Basically what you do is you define your closed loop system. So this is the system dynamics with the neural network controller kind of embedded. So it's basically just a function of the state of the system. And we're actually using neural network verification tools to calculate these RSOAs. So what we get from neural network verification is an upper and lower bound of a nonlinear function, right? That's the thing that those tools do. And if we define our nonlinear function as our closed loop system, that actually becomes a reachability calculation, because we're taking our set of initial states, we're getting those bounds, and then we get our set of output states. And those output states in a state space are the reachable sets, in this case at time 1, right? So if this is the set that we care about calculating, this true reachable set, we've overbounded it with some linear approximations, and we now get this rectangular RSOA that bounds the set of possible future states for the system. We can then repeat this calculation. So if I set this previously calculated RSOA as our initial state set for the next time step, that gives us kind of the set of states that you could reach at time 2, right? And we refer to this as a concrete RSOA, or a concrete RSOA calculation. So concrete calculations are super fast, so it's desirable to use them, but they do suffer from what's called the wrapping effect. And this is basically where you take over approximations of over approximations, and that kind of compounds error at each time step. So let's see how that actually works. So if we have our initial state set here, so this is the set of states that our system can start in, what we actually care about are these true reachable sets. These are the set of states that the system will reach from that initial state set, exactly. So there are no states outside of here that could come from the initial set. To calculate the reachable set at time 2, or an over approximation of that, we first have to calculate over approximation of the reachable set at time 1, right? So this now bounds our reachable set at time 1, which is great. We did it fast, very nice. But what we're now approximating is actually this initial state set. So if we consider the set of all possible states that start in this reachable set, that might look like this, right? So this orange region contains all the states that start in the blue region, right? Which is not, the same as the set of all states that start in that more oblong region. right? So this orange thing is actually what we're approximating at time 2. So this is what our picture looks like. So this is the set that we calculated. This is the set that we care about. This orange thing, we don't actually want that. But as we do this more and more, we see this kind of compounding error where error builds up at each time step. And this is a problem because if you have a collision with some region that you want to avoid, that may actually not represent a true collision with the actual true reachable set here. So there's a couple different things that we can do to reduce this phenomenon. So partitioning is one of them. Partitioning basically splits up the initial state set. So if this was our original picture, we now split up the initial state set and we have 2 different sections that we're linearly approximating, right? And that gives us the ability to better approximate this nonlinear function. You can imagine if you split it up very finely, you could get a very good approximation of a nonlinear function. So this is how partitioning kind of addresses the wrapping effect, just through this better approximation. The issue is that it scales poorly with the state space. So you can imagine, again, when we go from a drone, maybe 3-dimensional, or a car 3-dimensional, to a drone 6-dimensional, we get this exponential scaling effect for partitioning, which is not ideal. Symbolic calculations, on the other hand, calculate multiple time steps in the future. So if instead of defining our single-step closed loop system, we define a 2-step closed loop system. So this is now kind of the composition of our closed loop dynamics. We're now approximating a reachable set at time 2, right? So this is our time 2-step function, and we're basically doing the same thing here. But now if the picture looked like this earlier, where we were approximating this orange thing with our concrete reachability calculations, we can now directly approximate the 2-step calculation or reachability reachable set with this symbolic calculation. So this is another nice way to combat the wrapping effect. The issue is that the composition of that function makes the analysis itself harder, more computationally expensive, because this FCL2 contains 2 neural networks. So we're basically doing twice as much work to analyze it. So what my contribution is to address this issue is CARV. So this is constraint-aware refinement for verification. The insight with CARV is that the conservative over approximate sets aren't actually an issue if they're far from the obstacles, right? So the idea here is to calculate concrete RSOAs until there's a conflict, and then we can refine them symbolically if there is a conflict. And this isolates the expensive calculations, which we'll see in green, to the most critical regions where the cheap calculations are elsewhere. So just to give you a picture of what this looked like, we calculate the concrete reachable sets. These are all the blue sets, and then we see a collision. What we do then is we kind of backtrack and we say, okay, let's try and make that better with a symbolic calculation, right? So this is now a new RSOA that we've just replaced by using a symbolic refinement technique. And then we can keep going from there. So that gives us, some leeway where these sets can be calculated concretely again, but maybe there's another collision. We can then backtrack again, maybe calculate a RSOA symbolically from this initial set, and then keep going. So you can see how it works, where we kind of make the RSOAs smaller near the obstacle, and then everywhere else they're big, and it doesn't really matter too much. We also avoid doing long horizon symbolic calculation by setting this maximum parameter that gives us the ability to kind of leapfrog back from some conflict set, right? So if we refine this set symbolically, we can then use that as kind of a jumping off point to refine reachable sets over a longer time horizon without running into the same issues that we see with typical symbolic calculations if we were to try and do this entire thing at once. So to start looking at some results, so we'll look at obstacle avoidance for a ground robot. So this is our initial state set up here. It's kind of small, but it's got a bunch of sample states that kind of show us what the true reachable set from that initial state set are. And we're trying to avoid these 2 obstacles here. Using the other approaches, so partitioning and symbolic approaches, we can see that the symbolic reachability calculations were not able to actually verify the entire problem. So it stopped early, it ran out of memory. It would have taken roughly 14 minutes if it had sufficient memory based on just kind of some extrapolation. Partitioning does successfully verify the problem, but it took 9 minutes and 32 gigabytes of RAM. So it took up all the memory on my computer, which is, again, not ideal for a verification of this size. Carve, however, successfully verifies the ground robot problem in 9.32 seconds. So what we see here is a bunch of concrete calculations, and then we see this conflict. And what it's doing now is going backwards to try and refine that symbolically. And that's what this looks like, right? So this set is much smaller now. We've now deconflicted with the obstacle, and we can continue on our way. Cool. Next, we tried to see how this scales with state dimension. So we put it on a quadrotor model that was 6-dimensional. Again, we're trying to verify over 50 time steps roughly. And so for this system, we're verifying a long time horizon and high state dimension. So this was something that we weren't able to do earlier. And that's represented in this table. So let's see how this looks. It's basically the same as the unicycle model, but now we're driving through these gates. And the system is 6-dimensional, so it's a more difficult verification problem, but we're able to successfully verify in 32.48 seconds. The symbolic and partitioning approaches were unable to verify this with the given constraints or the memory resources on my computer. So overall, Carve was the only approach to be able to verify 3 different problems. I didn't show the other one for the sake of time, but Carve was able to verify all of them in the fastest amount of time. So the summary of contribution 1 is Carve. It's a refinement technique that scales with respect to the state dimension and time horizon, and we were able to successfully verify each of the problems that we evaluated. Contribution 2 has to do with the online disturbance. So again, just to talk about kind of the issue, Carve is an efficient technique for refinement of pre-deployment verification of RSOAs, right? The issue is that over the lifetime, system may encounter widely varying disturbances. So you can imagine that this boat, again, on any given day, the kind of dynamics look like this, but if it sucks up a bunch of seaweed, the thrusters don't work so well, and now we have dynamics that look more like that. So there are 2 different ways that you can deal with this, and neither of them are particularly good. You can ignore the disturbances, so you can assume that the disturbances won't affect the system, and that's bad because then you're unsound, which is basically a way of saying that you aren't actually safe when the disturbances are present. You can also just assume the worst case disturbances are always there, right? And that's going to give you a super conservative result because most of the time your dynamics look like these 2 arrows, and then very rarely do they look like that. So how can we kind of deal with this issue with the pre-deployment certification approach? So our idea is to use online reachability. So we're using runtime data collection in this case to estimate the disturbances and then pass those disturbance estimates onto the actual reachable set calculations that can run online. So this is kind of a sketch of what it looks like, but we'll see more detail in a moment. So first, we'll just observe system data can be used to estimate the disturbances. So the idea is to collect data from the system as it's running, and then compare that behavior to the model of the system to determine kind of the magnitude of the disturbance. And specifically, we're using a moving horizon estimator to estimate these disturbances. And basically what this does is look at a window of previous data. So you may have calculated a bunch of data, but you're looking at the last 20 or so points, and you pass them into this big optimization, which looks scary, but it's basically saying, we want to match the best state estimate on the system. We want to match the measured data, and then we can use this disturbance term to kind of absorb the remainder, right? And this is actually the thing that we're kind of mostly caring about for the case of the online reachability analysis, because this gives us it gives us the disturbance and the disturbance uncertainty. And so we'll see how we can pass those into the reachability calculations. Here, where if we use our, we have a rate limit on the disturbance and uncertainty terms. So this is, so this is how fast kind of the disturbance can change and how the uncertainty can change. And what we're doing is we're representing this with a computational graph, right? So if we build this graph, this is basically representing our closed loop system. So we have our system state, and then we have our disturbance state. So this is our estimate of the disturbance. And we can use our computational graph to further build the disturbance rate increasing terms. And what this gives us is a guaranteed bound on future states or future behavior of the system subject to unknown disturbances. So passing this into kind of our pipeline, we first initialize this computational graph. And this is something you can do just offline. You don't have to do it more than once. But then at runtime, we're running our system and it's collecting data. That data is passed to the moving horizon estimator. And the moving horizon estimator, again, is estimating those disturbance terms and passing it into the reachability calculation through that computational graph. So what this gives us is a safety certificate at every given time step, and then we just repeat that as our system is running. So what does this look like for results? We ran this on a boat. So this is a dual thruster boat. It's got left and right thrusters. And basically how it's just steering by changing the magnitude of the thrust on one side or the other. We have our initial state set in this picture, the reachable set over approximations. We're trying to stay out of these unsafe regions. And then we have this desired trajectory and these left-right thruster health bars that we'll see kind of change in magnitude as the system goes. So on this picture on the left, we're considering a symmetrical thruster failure. So as the system is running, it's kind of doing its own thing. And then at this time step, our thrust gets cut in half, right? So what you can see is these reachable set over approximations that we're calculating online, they expand, so they're representing the covariance getting bigger because we have less of an idea of what the system is actually doing. And then they're also going to shrink back a little bit and show that the system is going slower after that thruster failure, right? So now we're again representing the true dynamics of the system because we've got that disturbance estimate. In this case, we see an asymmetrical thruster failure. So now just the right thruster is cut. And you can see the reachable set over approximations kind of showing that the system is going to start going to the right because it's got this estimate of the disturbance. And it gives us a kind of forewarning of a possible collision with the unsafe set, which indeed the robot does leave. What was really cool about this work is that we were able to deploy it on the Charles River. So this was, I think, the first actual deployment of neural network verification on a true hardware system. And as far as I know, it's still the only deployment of neural network verification. But we see the thruster is the same symmetrical thruster failure here, gets cut by this disturbance term. And again, our reachable set over approximations gets smaller and represent the slower speed of the system under that disturbance term. So the summary of C2 is that we combated the conservative disturbance modeling with online state or disturbance estimation and incorporated that into the reachability analysis, demonstrating that neural network verification is actually really useful as a utility for online safety monitoring. So with contribution 3, we kind of step back and we've noticed that we've verified controllers so far. So we've considered a lot of control issues, but what about state estimators? And if we think back to this original picture that we saw of the cats that were perturbed into an accordion, the question is, how does this affect neural feedback loops that use this, and how can we defend against those adversarial attacks on their perception? And just to kind of give a little bit of background, so there is, work on verification of vision systems. It's just challenging. So reachability analysis with perception in the loop requires that we translate sets of states into sets of images. So you could imagine, if you have this initial state set and you calculate a reachable set, different parts of this reachable set will see different things, right? And so there's a challenge of mapping those sets of images into sets of states. One super cool work does this by using GANs. So it's learning a state to image mapping where there's this extra network that's kind of tacked in front that learns a representation of the environment, which is kind of a latent variable that's passed into the vision control neural network. And so this whole neural network becomes the thing that you're actually analyzing in this case. The issue with that is that you're analyzing a much bigger network, so it's a harder verification challenge, and then also you're introducing possible errors in this latent representation. So the alternative thing that we consider is safety filtering with state estimation. So this is the online approach, and we're able to leverage those online neural network verification calculations that we saw in the previous chapter. So to give a more of a background on Hamilton-Jacobi reachability, and safety filtering. What Hamilton-Jacobi reachability does is it calculates a value function that encodes the maximal safe set. So if v of x is greater than 0, that means that for that state, there is guaranteed a safe control that preserves the safety of the system. So looking at the actual filter, it looks like this, but we have broken it down so that, if the neural network control is safe, so this original neural network control is safe, the safety filter does nothing. So that's kind of nice because that means that the neural network controller is able to do its own thing normally. But if it's unsafe, we replace it with a safe control. And that safe control is calculated here. And it's basically just saying, find the best control given the worst case disturbance on the system. So the issue with this is that safety filters typically assume perfect state information. So they're not able to protect neural feedback loops with learned estimation. And this looks like the picture in the the perfect case where you have good state information. So if this is the unfiltered trajectory here, the safety filter maybe kicks in and keeps the system on the runway. But in a similar case here, where we have a difference of state estimation error, the safety filter maybe keeps the state estimate on the runway, but the true state kind of drives off the runway. So this is obviously a violation, and there's not a good, there wasn't existing work on kind of addressing this problem. So the question then becomes, how can we protect neural feedback loops against the state estimation error from adversarial attacks? And so what I propose with my third contribution is Guardian. So this is Hamilton-Jacobi reachability with neural network analysis. And so what Guardian does is it's basically an uncertainty-aware reachability defense against adversarial interference. What it does is it basically calculates the neural network. We take the neural network estimator. So this is the thing that's taking in the camera image, and then we look at how big of a perturbation the camera image might receive, right? And so that gives us our reachability calculations just like before, except now we're looking at the neural network estimator. So what we get from this is a set of possible states that the system may occupy under that perturbation, which we pass into our Guardian filter. So this is what it looks like, but we'll look at it more on the next slide. So what Guardian does is it basically it's the same Hamilton-Jacobi reachability formulation as earlier, but now we're saying if the neural network control is safe for the worst case state, do nothing. But again, otherwise replaced with safe control. And again, the safe control is similar to the Hamilton-Jacobi original Hamilton-Jacobi reachability formulation. But now we're finding the control given the worst case state and disturbance. So this is guaranteed safe when there is a uniform safe control direction over your uncertainty set. And so that might look like this lane keeping example where we have kind of all states in this uncertainty set here turning right to stay on the runway. To look at an example, so this is a TaxiNet example that's common in the neural network verification space. We basically have a plane on the runway here, and it's trying to stay on the runway, but it's got some adversarial perturbations to its images. So these images on the top are the clean images, and then we can see below those clean images an attacked image. And it's interesting to see as you watch these videos, the attacked images, they are again kind of visually indistinct from the clean images. So without a filter, the punchline here is that the plane does leave the runway under the adversarial attack. So this controller is normally, under normal conditions, is able to keep the plane on the center line, but under the adversarial attack, it falls off the runway. What Guardian does is it uses the state uncertainty estimate. So it's got this bound on the state uncertainty, and it's able to filter based on that bound to actually keep the plane on the runway, which is super, super cool. So we're able to protect these systems against adversarial attacks. There were a few different works that do some state estimation, uncertainty-aware safety filtering, but they're not designed for adversarial attacks. So they actually do violate safety. So if we look at this image here on the left, we're considering a case where we have this reference signal that we're trying to track, and it's close to the unsafe region on the top and And everything kind of works. There's 3 different CBF approaches that we're using here. There is a little bit of a violation in this case, but when we increase the state estimation uncertainty, each of the CBF-based approaches, so that RCBF, MRCBF, and RCBF-QP violate the safety constraint. And this is because they're only proven safe for an inflated version of the safe set. Alternatively, however, Guardian is able to stay safe, so it stays inside the safe region, and it's minimally conservative, so it's able to track that reference signal as well as it can given the state uncertainty. So in summary of contribution 3, I introduced Guardian, which is a reachability formulation guaranteed to protect systems that have learned state estimators that are subject to adversarial attacks. So for contribution 4, I introduced, it's kind of the same problem, but I'm going to talk about the scalable and performance safety filtering for NFLs with large state estimation error. So the takeaway from Guardian, Guardian has strong guarantees, but only under certain conditions. So we saw the limitations of Guardian. It was dependent on this uniform direction of safe control. It's also dependent on Hamilton-Jacobi reachability, which suffers from the curse of dimensionality, like we saw with the partitioning. So it scales poorly with state dimensions. And then again, the other issue or the other approaches show safety only for an inflated safe set. So the takeaway from this is that measurement robust safety filtering is not yet solved. And so, sorry. So in the case of the taxi net example, the assumptions are satisfied here because you're always turning in one direction for the entire state uncertainty set. But in obstacle avoidance, for example, that assumption, that monotonicity assumption, is violated. So it's unclear which way to go in this case, right? If your state is somewhere in this tube, maybe some states on the left want to turn left, some states on the right want to turn right. So there's that kind of disconnect in the monotonicity assumption here. Just to give some robust CBF background, so control barrier functions solve this optimization, which is similar to the Hamilton-Jacobi reachability formulation, where we're basically saying we want to find the best control or the control closest to the desired control, such that we don't approach the obstacle or dangerous region too quickly. And there's a couple different robust CBF formulations that we can consider. So these are all the approaches that we saw on kind of the tail end of the Guardian results, the MRCBF, the RCBF, and RCBF-QP. These basically do the same thing as a normal CBF, but include an extra robustness term, right? So this is the same formulation as above, considering the point of the state estimate. And then we have a tightening of the constraint with that robustness term, where this error term kind of specifies the size of that state uncertainty. But there's a new set-based robust CBF. So this is called the duality CBF. And it uses a similar idea to Guardian, where we try and find safe controls over the entire state uncertainty set, X. So this is different, right? We have this kind of floating state S, and we're saying, try and satisfy this constraint over your entire state uncertainty set. But each of these approaches kind of have their own issues. So if we consider this example, this is a motivating example where we have a ground robot moving at constant velocity. And so it's got this state uncertainty set, and it basically has to choose, to turn left or right to avoid this obstacle. We can see at this top example here, the state uncertainty set is entirely on kind of one side of the obstacle. And so the approaches both are able to turn left to avoid the obstacle, despite the measurement errors. On the bottom here, we have our state uncertainty set kind of straddling what I call this decision boundary. And the decision boundary basically is the point where you decide whether to turn left or right. So above the decision boundary, you would turn left, below you would turn right. In this case, because there's no uniform safe control, the set-based approaches completely fail. Their optimization isn't well conditioned, and they crash directly into the obstacle. The point-based approach is considering the state estimate at the top here. So it wants to turn left, but it doesn't issue enough of a correction. So it actually still collides with the obstacle. So these are the two failure modes that we kind of see with these set-based and point-based CBF formulations. And so what I what I developed in response to this is kind of a hybrid between the two. So this base idea is the drift measurement robust CBF, the DMR CBF, and it kind of combines both philosophies, right? So this is a set robust term. So I'm considering the set of all states in that state uncertainty set. And then there's a point-based term on the control piece. So the controller term is point-based, and so it's got kind of a more decisive ability to make decisions. The issues with this is that the optimization over the drift terms, so this piece, is a slower thing that leads to slower computation time. And also the worst case assumption may leave some performance on the table. So building off the base idea, inspired by some cool work from Chuchu's group on neural CBFs, I incorporated a learned robustness term to kind of address the issues of the DMR CBF. So the NMR CBF, the neural measurement robust CBF, looks like a point-based CBF term, but this term is kind of initialized to imitate the behavior of the DMR CBF. So we trained this with a two-step process. We first used supervised learning, so that we're imitating the DMR CBF, so it's kind of behaving like that hybrid approach that we talked about previously. But then we also fine-tune it using this cost function here that includes a collision penalty, so we want to make sure that we avoid the obstacles, task objectives, so how well are we tracking that initial controller, and then just a regularization term to make sure things are well behaved. And so what does this look like? So first I evaluate just the DMR CBF. So this is kind of the analytical version that we're looking at here. And so on the failure case from earlier, where we have this kind of split decision, the DMR CBF again fails because it's ill-conditioned. The RCBF QP doesn't issue enough of a correction, but our DMR CBF is able to issue enough of a correction and use that point-based strategy to turn left and avoid the obstacle. So that's pretty cool. But what that leads to the question, what about maybe other initial conditions in this area, and what about other state uncertainty values of this kind of set, or the state uncertainty set? So if we increase the state uncertainty set, what does this picture look like? So we evaluated a bunch of initial conditions, and what we see here are two different pictures that show low uncertainty and high uncertainty. And each of these CBF-based approaches is evaluated to show that the duality CBF kind of fails for a very strong band of the uncertainty, because anywhere the uncertainty is over that decision boundary, it's going to crash into the obstacle. The RCBF QP does better. It has a 6.5% collision rate in this example, so 1.7 in that example. But again, because it's not issuing enough of a correction, it does not do as well as our DMR CBF, which has the lowest collision rate among all the approaches. So to kind of extend our analysis to consider both the safety and performance of these approaches, we consider a planar double integrator, and we're trying to avoid this obstacle here and reach this goal. So we're considering safety, so how do we avoid the obstacle, and how quickly do we reach the goal. Just to kind of give you a qualitative visualization of each of these approaches. These show a bunch of trajectories with epsilon equals 0 right now, but as we increase that uncertainty term, we can see how each of the approaches kind of differ. And as we increase the uncertainty, we can see this RCBF QP starts to fail because it's not issuing a strong enough correction. And the duality CBF, it's a little bit hard to see, but you can see that it's kind of stopping in front of the obstacle before deciding which way to go. Whereas our approaches are a little bit less conservative, able to kind of smoothly navigate around the obstacle, which we'll see more quantitatively in the next slide. So this plot, there's a little bit to unpack here, but what we did from the last slide is we categorize each trajectory as either goal reached, timeout, or unsafe. And so the goal reached trajectories are all the colored bars. The timeout is the gray, which is only up in the duality CBF, and then the unsafe is black. And so what we see here is that the duality CBF is super, super conservative, right? It's got a slow kind of goal reaching time, especially at higher state uncertainties. the RCBF-QP is unsafe at higher state uncertainties, so it's got a lot of collisions. But our two approaches are able to keep a perfect safety rating, and the NMR-CBF especially is less conservative, so it's able to reach the goal in similar time as the RCBF-QP, but without violating safety. So this is a super cool result that we also kind of evaluated on a 12-dimensional quadrilateral model. So this shows how we're able to scale our approach to higher state dimensions. Similar results here in terms of the trends, but we also evaluated each approach's computational expensiveness. So the duality CBF is much more expensive, as you can see, as we scale up to 12 dimensions. The duality CBF becomes, many times more expensive than both the RCBF-QP, the DMR-CBF, which has that online computation, so it is a little bit slower, but our NMR-CBF is competitive on time with the RCBF-QP. We also put our NMR-CBF on a quadruped, so this is a super cool result. This is our Unitree Go-To sitting in the high bay, and we'll see this video that shows a couple different experiments. So this is a CBF without any error, so there's perfect state information assumed. And as you can see, the CBF is able to avoid these two obstacles here without colliding. So this is kind of the nominal case. But when we put that same CBF under state uncertainty, so we can see here these two different kind of transpositions of the quadruped. This quadruped thinks it's to the right of where it actually is. This quadruped thinks it's to the left of where it actually is. We see two different collisions, right? So this one thought it was over here, so it didn't issue a correction, and it crashes. The quadruped up there thought it was to the left, and so it didn't issue enough of a correction at the top obstacle. Our NMR CBF is able to avoid both obstacles because it's using that state uncertainty estimate and is able to account for that in the robust CBF formulation. So in summary of contribution 4, we introduced the DMR and NMR CBFs, which were scalable CBF formulations that gave state-of-the-art obstacle avoidance in the presence of high state estimation error. So to summarize my contributions, so I basically span both design time verification, runtime safety filtering, and then across a bunch of different types of disturbances, right? So CARD C1 considered design time verification with initial state uncertainty as the uncertainty type, considering N neural network controllers. Contribution 2, runtime verification, unknown dynamic disturbances, again, neural network controllers. And then both contributions 3 and 4 considered online safety filtering with image perturbations to the adversarial attacks, and considered both neural network controllers and neural network estimators. These are the publications that are associated with each of these contributions. So we had a nice LCSS journal for CARV. The online reachability work was submitted to ICRA and TCST. Guardian was just accepted and submitted, or was published in LCSS earlier this year. And then the NMR CBF work is in preparation for another letters type journal. So the overall result of my thesis is that we have a safer world. So we're able to do a lot of things that we weren't able to do before with more comfort because these neural feedback loops have been kind of safeguarded by a variety of methods. Okay, so with that, it's time to talk about all the people that got me here. So first and foremost, I want to thank John. John is a great advisor. He dedicates a lot of time to his students. He puts in so much work. It's amazing. I remember, we were at ACC in 2023, I think it was, and John asked me if I wanted to go to dinner with him, and I said yes, and we had a nice dinner. On the way back, we were just walking towards our hotel, and somebody ran by, and then they doubled back, and they ran up to John, and they were like, "Are you Professor Jonathan Howe?" and then we had a short conversation with this guy about how John's work had changed his life and how amazing John is as a researcher. And in that moment, and since that moment, I've really appreciated the fact that I'm working with this world-renowned researcher who gives me lots of time. That people are like kind of scrambling to get, and we just had a nice dinner together, and this guy was like itching for 5 minutes with John. So John gets the most out of his students. He pushes us hard to be the best that we can be. And I really appreciate having done my PhD with John. I want to thank my thesis committee. So Choo Choo, you were one of the first people who I kind of got to know at MIT. I met with you very, very shortly after getting admitted. And ever since then, you've been a great kind of mentor and person to talk with about research, but also other things. So I really appreciate you for that. Michael and I wrote a paper together a while ago, and ever since then, I've been meeting with him and also his students very regularly, and his influence has been, very appreciated on kind of my research path. So thank you for that, Michael. For my thesis readers, the rest of my thesis committee, Professor Michael Everett. Michael was one of the senior people in the lab when I joined. And he kind of took me under his wing, as John said earlier, and was super, super helpful in getting kind of acclimated in the lab. The ACL has a strong learning curve, I would say, and Michael helped me navigate that very, very well. Essen and Chelsea, who's unable to make it, but Essen is here, thankfully. Essen, Chelsea, and I have been meeting probably once every 2 to 4 weeks, I would say, for the last 4 years, just talking about different things. We ran a workshop together, and Essen has been super helpful in kind of guiding my research and giving ideas and, just kind of navigating the world of academia. So I appreciate you for that, and Chelsea, who I think is on a camping trip today, but very soon. I also want to acknowledge all of my collaborators. So people at Aurora, people in Mike Benjamin's group, Mike Benjamin himself. I want to thank Alex and Lucas, who are in the lab, who have collaborated with me on papers. And then, most of my thesis readers, Sydney and Sam as well, for all the work that we do together. It's really nice to work with you all. And I'm definitely, better off for it. I also want to thank all the people at University of Iowa who helped get me here. So Professor Venancio Cicella, I still remember my first state space controls class with him, which would have been, I think, probably about 7 years ago now. But I remember asking him on the first day, he put some just differential equations on the board, and I was like trying to sort out what was the state and what was the input. And he was like, "We're not there yet." But I really appreciate having gotten to work with him at the University of Iowa, and he kind of shaped my passion for this kind of autonomy work. Pablo Carica, Phil Dyerling, and Xiaoping Zhao, thank you all for the letters of recommendation and for guiding me as I went through kind of the graduate applications process. I also want to acknowledge my K through 12 teachers, some of the highlights. My calculus teacher, Miss Weirs, super fun class, gave me a good background in calculus, and just reinforced my love for math. Miss Horner, who just always made me feel very welcomed in her class, and we always had a good time. And then Mrs. Campbell, who may or may not be on Zoom, but my kindergarten teacher, who I reached out, and she was very thankful to be part of this journey. I also want to acknowledge the ACL. So I've had the privilege of working with a lot of really fun, but also very smart people throughout the years. I couldn't have asked for kind of a better home throughout my PhD lifetime, and I think it's a very good group for camaraderie, but also we work hard, so it's a little bit easier to kind of put your nose down and just do work when you've got a good group of people doing that around you as well. Thank you also to Britt, who is our office admin. Did lots of reimbursement requests with Britt, and she helped manage travel. I got to go to Japan and San Diego and lots of different places, and it was thanks to her kind of facilitating things. And thank you to Sushin for similarly kind of being in the background and doing things very effectively. I want to also thank my Boston friends, especially Lucy, Annika, Alex, Mason, lots of people in the lab. This was the bike ride to Provincetown, which was a lot of fun. I've really appreciated my time in Boston, and it's for all the great things the city offers, it is the people that make it so special. So I appreciate you all. Thank you also to my Iowa friends, so all my swimming high school friends, Tom, Will, Matt, Ethan. You guys are great, and you've been great about checking up on me, and I'm quietly just trying to finish my work, and they check in, and it's very nice. Thanks to Olivia for just she paved the way. She just finished her PhD in May, and it's been great to kind of chat with her and see what she's been up to and kind of compare her experience. Carly too finished her PhD a year ago now, so it's been great having all these people kind of in my circle and able to check in with. And I want to give a special thank you to all the people of Charles Street. So for those of you who don't know, yeah, they're in the back. We got a lot of people from Charles Street here. I've been living in the same house for 5 years now. And it's been a lot of people moving in and out, but I really appreciate getting to know all these different people. It's nice to kind of break out of the MIT sphere for a little bit when I go home. Ryan and Courtney were some of the originals. Ruick we'll talk about later. But Ryan and Courtney were there at the beginning. They've become really good friends. Ryan was able to make it all the way out from San Diego to be here today, so I appreciate that a lot. And then Sela, Avea, and Abby. Abby had to step out, but they're here now. So I really appreciate all of your friendship and just like camaraderie. The house itself is interesting. We've had a few rodent issues and some combative roommates. But overall, it's been a great experience, and there's a reason I've been living there for 5 years. So I appreciate you all. Ruick. So Ruick is the one roommate who was with me at the beginning and is still with me now. So he's stuck with it. We've had so many fun times together. I couldn't have asked for a better person to find on Facebook Marketplace. And the fact that you just randomly stumbled into our house and became like a brother to me is just amazing. We've had so many fun times together, and I just know that this is like a relationship that we'll keep for the rest of our lives. So I appreciate that. Coda, same story, just at work. Coda and I moved into the lab together at the same time. Coda was actually in the summer, but first day I remember setting my stuff down at the desk, and Coda was right next to me, and we've been at each other's sides for the last 5 years, and so I really just appreciate all that we've done together, all that you've done for me, all that I've done for you. I think just like Rowick, you're like a brother to me. I couldn't have asked for a better lab mate, desk mate. We went to Japan together. We had a great time. It's been a great ride, and I'm glad to be finishing this here with you. Coda, if you don't know, defended his PhD on Wednesday, so congratulations, Dr. Coda Kondo. But yeah, it's been so great. And then Emma. She was originally a Charles Street roommate as well. But I think over the course of our first year, or for her first year in a house, we realized that there was a really special connection between us. And so I just thank you. She's been, especially over the last, couple of years, she's been my biggest supporter. There were times, even as late as April, where I was like, maybe I won't finish the PhD. and Emma was always there, just encouraging me and giving me love. So I appreciate her. And then my family. So thank you to my cats, first of all. So it's bittersweet. It is their birthday today. We lost them earlier this year at the age of 19. So shout out to them. Thank you for comforting me, especially through high school when I was actually home, for donating their likeness to my presentation. I appreciate them a lot. Thank you to my sisters, Elena and Emily, who's on Zoom, just for letting me be your big brother. And I think that is, that's a part of my personality, is I've got some big brother energy. And so I appreciate you for both your friendship and camaraderie, and also, putting me into that role, which I think is a big reason that I am here today. And thank you finally to my parents, Daryl and Jan. Definitely would not be here without you. They have given me so much and really reinforced my desire to learn and explore. And I wouldn't be here without you either. So I love you. So with that, that's a backup slide. So with that, I'll open it up to questions. I will go back to maybe the slide that I probably should have put at the end. Here. Thank you.
All right, so we'll have public questions now. Anyone can ask questions, including the committee, and then we'll have a session with the committee and Nick ourselves. So if you want to vote questions. Again, first question, is this your art history, or is this?
It is. It is.
It is?
Yeah. Is that, yeah, I don't know if that's a good question or a bad. It is mine. It is my artistry.
You don't have to claim this, is what I realized.
There's no citation needed. I did it all myself. I used free PowerPoint icons.
Yeah.
The one person who maybe does deserve a citation is Emma, who helped me shift things around. A little more aesthetic.
Maybe you should have used chat. All right, questions?
So, a high level question I have is, when we have these neural networks in the loop, we know that the output perturbation as a function of input perturbation is generally vacuous in terms of guarantees, theoretically speaking. So is there something different when we use these networks in control feedback loops, or are these guarantees empirically
No, so these are strong guarantees. So the neural network verification stuff, so those bounds that we got on the neural network, those are strong guarantees. And so it's doing a lot of math, just bookkeeping and bound propagation to, like bound deterministically the set of outputs. So it is a strong guarantee.
to verify on a dense set and make sure?
Yeah, I mean it's using some bound propagation and other math, but it's not doing anything statistical. It is exactly like over approximating the neural network's behavior. Yeah, good question.
Good question. Was the neural measurement or bus CBF, right? So you had the drift, the DMR, and then for the NMR, you added a learn term with a it seemed like a soft formulation.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Did you lose any guarantees there?
You do lose guarantees
Okay.
with the NMR.
Okay, that would seem like the only one that would have been, yeah.
Yeah, so because you're doing,
Yeah.
this term is learned,
Yeah.
you've now introduced some
Yeah.
way to cause, some loss of guarantees. So yes,
Yeah.
so yeah, this one doesn't have the same guarantees that Lugard does have.
Okay, cool.
Your perturbations, like you first introduced them as in, I guess in like vision space.
Mhm.
How did you like? How do you pick reasonable ranges to look at for that like epsilon value?
That's a good question. So the most direct answer, honestly, is so the work from Michael that I mentioned did find like a actual, a perturbation size that is able to steer the plane off the runway. So they were able to do that with kind of the pre-deployment verification. So that gives you kind of an idea of like, okay, if I wanted to drive the plane off the runway to show that I can keep it on the runway, that's a good place to start. Otherwise, yeah, I think it's kind of just a design question. Like it's, how visually different do you need things to be before, or like how visually distinct would you need things to be before you can kind of use that uncertainty, or like how big of a perturbation do you need before things become visually distinct? And then you would want to be able to guard against anything smaller than that. Yeah.
First off, great presentation. Thank you for making it a little more approachable to people not in the field. I was curious with the reachability, how you handle kind of edge cases. As we learned in Coda's presentation last week, sometimes they're drones that just flip and then drop straight down. But it looked like the reachability was mostly towards the trajectory that you're kind of planning for.
Yeah.
So what do you do about those kinds of settings? if
Yeah, so
anything?
that's a good question. I think it's hard to like, so all of these guarantees, I had several guarantees throughout my work. It's all subject to some assumptions. So guarding against, anything is, I think, very difficult. But it's just a matter of, probably kind of testing things and making sure. There are also, formal, more computation or like computer science type things that like will check, conditions and make sure that your model is correct and everything. So there are other tools that you could use that would kind of guard against different things, but everything is subject to, some sort of assumption. And so I think failing that, then it would be just a matter of like empirically testing and making sure that your system is robust through those methods. But that's, that comes with challenges as well. So.
Thanks.
Question. So like learning the disturbance, right, for the boat example, what's the limits of that, right? Like if there's a sufficient change in the dynamics, like I would, at least intuitively, it seems like you'd wanna like re-identify the system and then add disturbance on top of that.
Yeah, so
But
the
I'm
critical
guessing-
thing here is that you have you have the rate limit on the disturbance term.
Right.
So it's assumed that like the disturbance can't change too quickly.
Yeah.
And so those rate limits become kind of part of this computation graph. So you're always defending against them. But the idea is that as the disturbance does change, you're kind of adapting to that new
Following.
disturbance. Yeah.
Got it.
There are two questions in the chat.
Yep.
From Olivia and Jared.
Hmm.
And then they have two questions. What does the implementation of the methods you described into existing autonomous systems look like? And another thing is, which system, boat, drone, quadruped, was your favorite to work with? It's a good question.
Yeah, so what does this look like? The nice thing about these tools is that they're pretty plug and play. Like you can kind of, like the computational graph, for example, you build that, you specify, like, your dynamic, well, if you know your dynamics here, you might not know the disturbance terms, but you know your dynamics and you can build that into a computational graph pretty easily. There's not a whole lot of design that needs to go into it. It's relatively well conditioned for people who aren't subject matter experts necessarily. So that would kind of be the way that you would build this is a lot of these computational graphs, and so that's not so bad. The system that I most liked working with, probably the quadruped, honestly, which might surprise Emma given how many times I was complaining about it to her. But the quadruped I think was the most fun. The boat was fun, but it was I think a little more difficult, honestly. And I can thank my collaborators for sorting through a lot of those issues. But I think the quadruped is just such a cute little guy that is fun to watch run around. So I really like the quadruped.
And another question from Glenn McCoy. Can you use each carve, online reachability, Guardian, NMR across all platforms like air, ground, water? Yep.
Good question. Yes, definitely. So all of the things that I presented, I did have kind of motivating examples, different systems, but the math is abstracted so that it can be applied to a wide variety of things, even beyond what I talked about here. There's a lot of interesting work on like power grid systems and things that can be represented by this dynamics function, and each of my contributions is not tied to what it was applied to. Oh, Alex was first.
Great talk, especially Guardian, best project. Very fun. So as John mentioned at the start, you worked with Michael when you were a young student. For someone joining the ACL, say next year, what do you think are the most important problems to tackle in the next like 5 to 6 years in this field?
That's a good question. You'll notice I said earlier that the boat was the first and I think only thing that I've seen where neural network verification is actually used on board the system. So I think still a big problem. I've tried addressing this with my thesis, and I've definitely made good headway, but there's still a disconnect or a discrepancy between the systems that we're able to verify and the systems that people are putting out in the world. So I'm really interested in some of the work that George Pappas is doing. I'm hoping to work with him at UPenn on verification or safety for systems that have large language models on board. And so I think a lot of the work that we need to do is to see, okay, so the stuff that I've done, strong guarantees, but maybe harder to apply in practice. I think we can still find maybe a better balance of, this is something that will reliably keep a system safe, but is, something that maybe industry is more willing to accept putting on their actual platforms.
So for the quadrupedic hardware experiments, were you using the actual true dynamics of the quadruped, or was there some level of abstraction to like
Yeah, that's a good question. I did actually abstract it to this double integrator model. So the quadruped, you could model it in several different ways. I chose to basically take a double integrator and then put that on board the quadruped. So it was being controlled as that planar double integrator model.
Okay, cool. So then a follow-up question is, for complex systems like this, or some, you might have a manipulator on board, something like that, to what extent do you think it's important to, in some of the formulations that you're providing, capture those like true dynamics of the system versus having these layers of abstraction and then trusting the low-level controllers of some companies, maybe control system?
That's a good question. I think wherever it's impacting safety, you want to model things well, at least well enough to protect the system. So, if there was a manipulator on board the quadruped, you probably wouldn't need to model that if it's not like a safety critical piece. But probably more to the spirit of your question, like if you have a manipulator, that's a much more difficult system to model. And there's like maybe some like safe configurations that you need to make sure that you're staying within. I think you can still maybe abstract it, but there might be extra conservativeness that you have to build in to handle that difference between the abstraction and the true system. So I think it's something that would have to be kind of taken as like a case by case thing, but yeah, that's always the consideration is like, okay, maybe we can make things easier on one hand where we can abstract it, but then that might give us like a little bit more conservative behavior as a result.
All right. Any last questions?